What's up, everybody? Brett here, and we're back with my YouTube channel, Good Talk Gaming. And today, it's dropped. It's finally dropped, the Prophet and the Warlock DLC. I've jumped on to the multiplayer to try and find some good matchups, and this is going to be a good one. So the gentleman I'm playing against was super polite. I want to say that right off the bat. That's a Mr. I think his name is Wyvern. Said he was streaming. So a fellow producer of content. Nice to meet you. Playing my favorite race in the game, I have to say the Dwarves. Lizardmen are kind of like a close second or third, but I wanted to take a mixed army composition that would not only hopefully counter some of the Dwarven units, but give me a chance to showcase some of the more powerful ones and some of the ones that I felt like weren't being represented very well on a lot of the early access videos. So we're playing on an awesome map. There's a lot of elements here. This is I think this is the quest battle map from Karl Franz, from the Empire campaign, where you get to ambush from kind of the woods here. So this is my first thought, and I want to run you guys through my tactical thought as to why I deployed out here, why I deployed in this kind of funny formation. So first off, the Dwarves, right? Very powerful ranged faction. I expected artillery, and I really expected a lot of Thunderers. I also expected these Trollhammer torpedoes. The Dwarf player is playing very much according to the meta, and it's what I expected. And when I came into here and I saw the troop count was so huge, I knew that he had played the build that I most dreaded playing against. I was hoping he would take artillery. I was hoping he would go with a more elite front line and, kind of skimp on his back line. But that's not the case. He had so many units that he was basically able to cover himself from all positions. So secondly, I was going to use the forest as cover, right? Anticipating cannons, anticipating thunderer fire. Using the forest as cover would have been a pretty nice way of circumventing all of that damage. However, I fully expected for a dwarf player to take advantage of this terrain here and this great line of sight from the top of this terrain. Him deploying with a very large force in the center of the map the way he did completely countered everything I thought was going to happen. So I deployed on this side to give myself the shortest run distance to his front line, and then I was hoping that would either allow me to either sneak through this side here and get into his back line, hopefully artillery, or to go and swing wide in this direction, but that did not happen. So instead, I had to go for a bit of a flank overload. I tried to put pressure here and then kind of deny the rest of the forces from swinging in to what ended up being my back line. So it ended up being kind of a strange game, but I felt like I learned a lot. So I wanted to bring you guys in on that. And since his army is so, not complicated, I think it'll be easier to break his down first. Front line of Longbeards, they don't break. They have encouragement aura and just great stats all the way around. Those who've never seen a Longbeard, check these dudes out. They're one of my favorite units. He's also got a pretty close immediate backline of Iron Drakes with Trollhammer torpedoes. Great anti-large, and they don't have the best range, so they're in a good position to do some great damage. Ulthar's Raiders, with their special ability marked by Ulthar, they can lower your resistance to missile damage, and that's going to be pretty powerful when you consider just how many Thunderers are on the battlefield. Looks like 4, so they're going to be getting that armor-piercing melee, armor-piercing missile damage, and they're not bad in melee is what I was going to say. So, the cheaper flanking options for the dinos, like these feral cold ones, even getting into a group of Thunderers, they're not going to have the best effect because Thunderers are essentially, about Dwarf Warrior stats, and they have very good armor at 80, so it's not that hard to break them. And then he just went wide with extra Dwarf Warriors. I like that. And a backline, just nothing but miners with blasting charges. Looks like 5 of them in all. And yeah, that's a great backline troop. If you need to, you can pull them to the front and use those charges to deal damage to infantry blobs. And then just a standard Rune Lord. He only has Rune of Wrath and Ruin and Rune of Negation for that direct damage and for the damage resistance. So they increased the cost of the Rune Lord, which is something I was kind of happy to see in the patch notes. Pretty much people just take him. By increasing the health of Belegar, of Thorgrim, of Ungrim, I expect we'll see a lot more of them in competitive play. So for my army, and I was pleasantly surprised with their performance, I went with the red-crested skinks. So a front line of these guys, they have Frenzy, Poison attacks, which is something they added since the Ever-Chosen tournament. I think that was very necessary. They felt slightly underpowered in their first form, but with that Frenzy, they get the extra, check this out, weapon damage, charge bonus, and melee attack. They're also immune to Psychology, which isn't super relevant versus the Dwarves, but they're a very cheap frontline armor-piercing option, and I don't expect the Dwarf player to focus much of their Thunderer Fire on them, so they're pretty much safe from range as far as I'm concerned. I wanted to kind of build a core around these dudes here. So the Saurus Spears, the Legion of Chakwa, aside from just being amazing looking with all of their gold accents, and their color scheme is also quite cool, they have more armor than a normal Saurus warrior. They also have just jacked stats from being a Regiment of Renown, but they have the special ability here, the Shield of Chakwa, giving plus 44% missile resistance. So I wanted to keep them in the center of my army as I approached, and if we were taking focus fire on my Skinks, or on my Bastiladon with the Ark of Sotek, or on Lord Croak, I wanted to have the option to pop that buff and protect them. But my opponent really surprised me with their targeting choices, and I ended up not having much of a use for the Legion other than as a frontliner. So that kind of made me sad. I was expecting to do some kind of cool plays there, and it ended up not being totally necessary. As I already showed, I have these Feral Cold Ones, and I kept them far back in reserve, having to see which side of the battlefield I needed to flank on. And now I'm going to be trying to overload this side. I'm going to be using my Ripperdactyls as well. So check this new unit out. Let's go ahead and pause before things get too crazy. The Ripperdactyls are a mean dwarf killing unit. They have armor piercing and anti-infantry bonuses as well as frenzy. They cause fear, which can be relevant against some of the lower tier dwarven units. And look at that, those faces. They look like armored piranhas. They're extremely terrifying. They can drop rocks as well. And whenever they are around Tiktaq'to, they can also receive the buff. Plus, actually, no, this is just Tiktaq'to. I'm sorry about that. They don't get any kind of buffs unless they are the Regiment of Renown anti-large variant. They can activate an ability that allows them to throw. It's like a little toad or something that these guys like to eat in the lore, and it drives them crazy and gives them a pretty big attack bonus. But I just have two standard Ripperdactyls. I think if you're going to bring them, that's the way to go against the Dwarves because of that anti-infantry bonus. The Regiment of Renown is meant more for large targets, and of course you're not going to find very many of those on the Dwarven side of the battlefield. Tic-Tac-Toe is a great compliment, I think, on his unique Pterodon Gwup, I think or Zwup. His name is Zwup, if I remember right. And he has some pretty cool items and abilities, but you don't want to bring all of them unless you think you're going to be fighting against other flying units. This is the only item that you should bring, the Mask of Heavens. So it affects allies in range, giving them plus 9 melee defense and 18 armor. It only works on flying units, so putting him in the center of this kind of Ripperdactyl formation I thought would be a pretty nice way of buffing that ability. He also has some other abilities that I took. Focus Instinct stops rampage on units around himself. Very good, but if you're using him as a backline harasser, you won't get very much of a chance to use this ability because there won't be anyone rampaging around him. Also took Master of the Skies. Buffs himself, gives him 45 melee defense and speed. Helpful if you're trying to escape from, some sort of infantry blob. Protect yourself while you're getting that speed increase to force yourself out of that bad engagement. And then getting the Drop Sphere of Tiphawk, which seems pretty good, but the problem was I went to use it this battle. It takes forever to drop. And I used it as if it was almost like a gyro bomb, and it does not drop that quickly. You basically have to sit him over a formation and then wait, and then it drops. So I had a bit of a whiff there, but I'm going to try and show you guys what I mean, like where I clicked it and then how much longer it took for it to drop. So something to be aware of. This was a very good learning battle, I have to say. I learned a lot from this particular fight. I also brought the new Regiment of Renown, the cohort of Sotek. We can go ahead and fast forward it again. These all red-crested skinks. They also have the poison and the armor piercing, but in addition they have the Refuse to Die ability, where entities cannot die while ability is active. It lasts 20 seconds, and I think that was nerfed a bit. They're also unbreakable, which is extremely relevant. And pardon the long intro, guys. There are a lot of cool units here to go over. The Umbral Tide are going to be engaging fairly quickly. They have a range of 125, so they're outpaced or outranged by these Thunderers at 145, but they can outrange the Iron Drakes with a measly 90 range. But they have Stalk. Perfect Vigor is great, but it's not really, in my mind, the most important thing. Stalk allows them to get into range and start firing without being taken out by what I was anticipating, you know, cannons, organ guns, something like that, and tearing them to pieces. So let's go ahead and speed it up a little bit. We don't have much left to go over. I'm going to try and take some shots at these Longbeards. We've got armor-piercing damage on them. And that did a little bit of damage, didn't kill any models yet. Aside from that, I also have the Bastiladon with the Ark of Sotek waiting to go. It makes it, in the lore, it kind of like dumps snakes on everybody, but in practice, it's kind of like an AoE damage ability all around the Bastiladon. They're not super expensive. I don't know if that's also a great choice versus the Dwarves, but I was expecting him to get in there against some Dwarven infantry and perhaps get surrounded and then pop that ability and see how well it worked. Now, there are so many range tools here for the Dwarves. The Dwarf player played really well. He spread all of his things out. So as I'm trying to engage and overwhelm this flank with some of these Feral Cold ones, he's just going to turn and snipe. And I don't have a wide enough front line to break through. I don't have, you know, a big enough flanking core to get past here and shut down all these powder units. So one of my units of Ripperdactyls, despite doing great damage, is going to get driven off pretty effortlessly here. The other Ripperdactyl's doing great, tearing into the miners, but I think that's going to be a marked by Ulthar, which is going to make them take a ton of damage. And I'm trying to be, you know, somewhat sticky and moving with these Ripperdactyls, not letting them get tied down by, you know, in a melee engagement they don't really want to be in. My Feral Cold ones are doing a great job against the miners. That's a pretty good matchup for them. Tic-Tac-Toe is currently tying down some Thunderers, doing great damage, but that's another group of Ripperdactyls gone. While the Umbral Tide. Oh, there we go. I'm glad I got to catch that. So that, of course, is from the as yet unintroduced Lord Croak. So he only has 3 spells, but he also has an upgraded form of the Shield of the Old Ones. Supreme Shield of the Old Ones for 44% damage resistance, which is just huge. He's also taking some shots in the side from the Umbral Tide. My Legion of Shakwa has gotten into the fight, but the Rune of Wrath and Ruin going off. They're managing to shut down these Iron Drake torpedoes, which I was very concerned about. I had to pull out Tic-Tac-Toe because he was being focus fired. Some of my Ripperdactyls are coming back into the fight. Meanwhile, the Umbral Tide shooting off all of their ammunition. They're getting quite a lot of damage. Not a lot of kills, but a lot of damage. And I'm going to be trying to use all of the versions of this spell that I can. They're very expensive. It's the Deliverance of Pizza, and there are 3 different levels of it. I was able to get the most powerful one off onto the Thunderers, but I'm pretty sure my opponent's going to be wise to it now, and he's going to move out of the second most powerful. I was trying to see if I could get a cool comparison, but he's going to be very good about dodging it, and at this point I realized Lord Croak is probably safe to engage in the front line. He does magic damage, which the Dwarves are resistant against, but I mean, with 450 weapon strength, he'll be able to do something. I really wish I had a bigger army, honestly. We could have pressured all of these range elements much easier. Lord Croak is fairly expensive, and here we can take a look at his awesome animations. His spirit kind of comes out of his mummified shell and attacks. Pretty awesome. We could take away all of those banners and we can actually get in here and see. I don't know if I missed the activation on the Ark of Sotek, but sadly, Lord Tic-Tac-Toe here, he's getting gunned down once again by the now free Thunderers. And we had a decent little pocket here. I was able to use my Regiment of Renown Skinks. They are unbreakable, so they were able to hold that line for quite some time. But these other red-crested Skinks absolutely destroy Dwarf Warriors. I mean, it's not even close, and they are, of course, a bit more expensive and specialized towards that, but I was happy to see that it was such a favorable engagement. Now, Lord Croak is unbreakable, so, you know, he's going to fight to the last. The last bits of my Skinks are routing off my Ripperdactyl elements that were able to come back. They got a few more kills, but were ultimately driven off. Lord Croak is going to try and get another Deliverance of Itzel on these Ulthar's Raiders, but it has such a long wind-up time that your opponent really has to not be paying attention. And I was happy I was able to get him with the first one. There goes the Supreme shield there, the old ones. But I was only able to use it perhaps once in the front line this battle, and then of course everyone's broken off. So I was just kind of having some fun. We were talking a bit about the matchup. Once again, very, very gracious opponent. Everyone's going to be trying to figure out these multiplayer matchups for a while. I think this build is just, it's going to serve you very well as the Dwarves against almost any Lizardmen lineup that you could hope to fight. Going very wide, I think, is the key. So if I was going to change something, let's say I wasn't anticipating the sort of artillery-focused, smaller Dwarven army that I was anticipating. Let's say I was assuming my opponent would go very, heavy into the meta. I would definitely change a few things. I think the Regiments of Renown are still solid. I like the Ripperdactyls, but maybe only as a one-of. I would probably take out Tiktaq'to. He's just too vulnerable in the air. I think if you're going to go with an air force against the Dawi, you have to have overwhelming numbers. So the first and major thing that I would remove would probably be Lord Croak. Taking magic is almost always recommended. I mean, it pretty much is always recommended, no matter what, right? But Lord Croak really relies on your opponent not seeing his spells coming. And unfortunately, he just telegraphs them too hard, and I was playing against a very good opponent. So you could either go with something like, if I wanted to be very competitive, Lore of Beast Skink Priest, and just spam out Manticores. The Manticores would tie down the Thunderers. That's the obvious thing to do. But I almost, against the Dwarves, I almost don't even like taking magic, to be honest. You could get for the same price as Lord Croak, I could have had a Sora Scar Veteran on a Carnosaur. And, that probably would have been much more effective, much more dangerous. And instead of these two Ripperdactyls, I probably could have gone, they're so expensive. I could have gotten 2 more Red-Crested Skinks for the cost of 1, essentially. And then for the other one, you could get like 2 Pterodon Riders and, be just as effective. These numbers are not really representative of how effective they are against the Dwarves. It's just this build was so effective at dealing with them that they weren't able to get that full value. So, and then also maybe the Bastiladon Arca Sotek. It was a nice pick. It was fun to use. The Umbral Tide was also, I thought, had potential to be useful. But sadly, they just don't kill models very well. They can do decent splash damage, but the models just don't die. You want them focusing large targets, and then having that Ancient Salamander, Salamander Hunting Pack combo, where you're reducing their resistance to fire damage, and so you start seeing an increase in your DPS. But I didn't have that. But yeah, I would go wider. I mean, that's the main theme here. Go wider and try and overwhelm these elements better than I was certainly able to this battle. But big thanks to Wyvern for being a good sport. Thanks to you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. We'll get some winning games shortly, and I'll try and maybe put aside my love of fun for a while and just try and bring builds that win. I would love to be kind of on the forefront of developing meta builds. A lot of times I feel like I develop a meta build. I play it several times on ladder, and I don't play in big tournaments or anything like that. But I feel like a lot of times I'm not trying to insinuate that I bring about meta, because that's definitely not the case. But I think I see it coming pretty early, and because I feel like I figured it out early, it's not as much fun for me to play anymore. So then I just revert back to playing fun builds where I get to try and find uses for niche units like the Ark of Sotek, which if you notice in the Everchosen tournament, nobody brought this guy. Nobody saw much value in him. The Legion of Shakwa was tried, I think, in the first battle, and mostly due to Miss Micro was completely wrecked. So, there's a lot of stuff to figure out here, and I do think Lord Croak has a home. It's just probably not against the Dwarves, who just have such excellent sniping ability and such heavy magic resistance and armor that his spells and abilities just aren't going to be as effective. But anyway, guys, once again, that's it. My name is Brett. My channel is Good Talk Gaming. I hope to see you in the next one, guys. Take care.